Hello, this is Andy Gilman with the Agora Foundation. On June 24th, 2023, Tom Krause and I interviewed Rachel Lang, Ojai City Council Member, in our ongoing series, videotaping Ojai's leaders, hearing about their thoughts about the visions of our community, their priorities, and their plans. We hope we find this informative. Look for more videos coming soon of future council members, community leaders, etc. We hope you enjoy, and we would love your comments. Thank you very much. So I'll kick it off if that's okay.
Sure.
Welcome, Rachel Lang. We appreciate your time and expertise and energy in these Ojai Chautauqua videos, getting to know the council, but also your views and your values about these subjects. Maybe as a way of starting, I think people might be interested in hearing about you and what brought you to Ojai.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this video series. I think this is wonderful, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Okay.
So I am originally from the Midwest, from a small town south of St. Louis, and I imagine that it's like what Ojai was 50 years ago. You know, it's on the outskirts of the lead mines, and we were hardworking people. That's who I came from. And when my work brought me to California in 2010 or 2010, and you know, I lived in LA, and I never really felt like I had that kind of community sense that I grew up with, where you know your neighbors, where if something happens, you bring each other casseroles. And you know, I've always been looking for a way to get back to having a community like that, and loved Ojai. You know, I would frequently visit, and we have a lot of really good friends here. And so when the pandemic happened, and we had a series of personal tragedies, we lost 4 family members within 3 years, immediate family members, including our daughter. And you know, it made us really get back to the basics and realize that what was the most important thing for us to move toward, and the most important thing that we wanted to create in our lives, was community. And we had a sense of community here, and when we decided that we were going to move here, everything happened really fast. And it's funny, the people we bought our house from, they moved to the same small town where my wife's parents are from in Tennessee. We're both at heart, you know, small town people. And so it was that desire that brought us here.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. And then if I could ask, what have you found your service to be on the council so far?
That's a great question.
Okay.
You know, I just have to say, gosh, if you came here thinking it'd be wonderful to be in a small community, it must be torturous at this point for you. I mean, I've been here a long time, and it's torturous for me
Really?
to see it. Yeah, it's never been this bad.
No.
Not even close. Not in the last 45 years.
And when you say this bad, what it?
Well, I mean, the tone of the meetings of the city council and the stuff that you would see in public forums and media and so on, the amount of disagreement. I mean, there's always been disagreement, of course, but it's never been of this kind that I'm aware of. It's maybe was happening underneath the table, something, you know, but never openly in meetings to the extent that we're seeing now.
Maybe you could add one dimension to what you're saying, which I agree with. The council, and I spoke the other night, which you heard, and I don't think Betsy would mind me saying that she and I met since then, which was really nice.
Good.
And we have a regular standing meeting now. But also on social media, somebody could post something like, the traffic downtown was terrible this weekend or something like that, and there's 100 comments. And it's against the tourist, against the city, what are they doing, just back and forth. It's social media is probably one aspect of the tone, but it does seem to be different now.
I agree. my grandfather was the first mayor of our small town, and so I grew up knowing what a political life or life of public service really is all about. And we would have firefighters and ambulance drivers, and anyone who didn't have a hot meal on the holidays would find themselves at our family gatherings. And so my idea of politics was that, was participating in community building, and doing everything I can with my talents, my skills, and my energy. I have a lot of energy to make the community more whole, more not that Ojai needs a lot of that, but so I've been disheartened by what you're describing, and I think what we experienced during the campaign, we were in one of the most politicized and divisive campaigns as I'm hearing, in Ojai's history. But this is a carryover from what's happening in national politics. And I think one of the challenges that we're facing right now is, how do we come together? Because fortunately, despite the division, we're accomplishing some really incredible things, and we're getting things done, and we're doing a lot for the community. But how much more could we do if we could all get along?
So when you say that, not that we need so much of that,
Mm-hmm.
I would think we need a lot of that. I mean, look at our school system. That's about as basic as you can have, right? Public schools. Who would not agree, irrespective of your political view or your philosophic view, who would not agree that a small, wealthy community should have a first-rate public school system? I mean, everybody would agree with that.
Absolutely.
And we don't. We have the bottom-tier public school system, which is so problematic, nobody knows what the hell to do with it. So how can that be?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why isn't that should be just easy, shouldn't it?
You would think so, but I think what's happening is that we are in a community in transition. We've been in transition since the pandemic, and I think the housing crisis that we're seeing right now is a part of that transition. People moving in, people not being able to afford to live in the same community that they grew up in. This is a part of that transition. And this is a transition that's taking place all in communities all over the country. And I think the transition is a mindset shift that's happening, partly because of the political conversations that people are having that are unlike they've ever been before. Also, partly because there's a shift in the way that we think of our elected leaders. And I think there's been really great strides in terms of transparency, in terms of, holding people accountable. I think that's really important. But at the start of every revolution or every significant turning point throughout history, we've seen a period that feels like chaos. And it's where all of the cracks in the foundation start to show themselves. And that's where we have opportunities. And I think we have a lot of opportunities in our community right now to see what isn't working and to work together to create solutions that are way outside the box, because we are in unprecedented times. And we need to be thinking outside of the box to build schools that are state of the art and that meet the needs of all of our children. And to help people who live here stay in their homes, and of course to address some of the changes that we're having with climate, which we could do a whole video just on climate mitigation, climate resilience, and what we're doing as a city in response to it. So my time in the council, first of all, I want to say that I am so grateful to be here. Every day I wake up, and that's the first thing I think of, is I'm so grateful that the people in my district elected me. I take this job so seriously. I'm so humbled. I know the responsibility and I know the opportunity that I have to serve in this way. And now that we know what we're dealing with in terms of where the division and the conversation, the more heated conversations are coming from, we can bring peace. We can come up with solutions.
Let me ask you, when you say that it's transitioning, I see what you mean. The vision of what it's transitioning to, that seems pretty open at this point. Does that sound fair?
Absolutely.
So the issues you brought up would be, those solutions are not fleshed out yet, and people seem to have differing opinions about what the transition should be going towards.
Yes, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's part of the disagreement, I guess, is what is it going to look like in 10 years or 20 or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we have, a lot of the division that we have is around land use and property rights. And regardless of what side people fall on, and I'm actually, I've been criticized for being in the middle, but I really see my role as being, I'm a kind of person who's able to hold nuance and to look at different perspectives. And so I've spent the last 6 months really trying to understand where, the spectrum of perspectives on housing in particular, land use in particular. I think you're right that our vision is, the vision that different people have different visions, but I think the biggest challenges that we face in terms of our ability to get along has to do with land use and housing.
So you were saying one of the biggest issues that divides people is land use.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering about it from a slightly different angle,
Mm-hmm.
which is not so much which are the issues or what are the issues, but more what's wrong with the process.
Mm-hmm.
So good governance
Yeah.
would not mean that everybody agreed,
Right, correct.
but it would mean that you could process things efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was a disagreement, there would be a time for various positions to be laid out. There'd be a time for discussion about those. There might be a time for discovery, and then there would be a vote, and then we would move ahead. And that would be that.
Correct,
Right?
yes.
That's what good governance would look like.
Correct.
And sometimes you'd be disappointed, you didn't get your way. Sometimes you'd think it was a mistake. Sometimes you'd be very happy. But it would be moving along. Now, if it doesn't do that, then you can hardly even call it governance. If it gets hung up on procedural matters, for example, so that the entire meeting consists of procedural bickering, then the machine is just not moving. It's not happening. So that seemed I think you would agree with that. That's a problem. So how do we fix that? How does that get fixed?
It's such a great question.
That's what the House looks like right now, the federal House, in my opinion. It's all stuck in bickering, and it's hard to get anything done. It takes weeks, it seems, to do anything. But anyway.
It's so true, and what's happening in national politics is moving down through the states, through into our cities and communities, and so I think two things need to happen. First of all, we are elected to represent our community, and so we, like it or not, the way that the community responds to one another. It's kind of like parents follow what's happening, or children follow what's happening with their parents, and if parents can't get along, children have a difficult time. And so I think we need to, as a council, put all of the political differences that we inherited through the political process that got us elected, and our election was so narrow. It took a month before we knew we had a mayor, who the mayor was going to be. And so that shows, too, that our community is narrowly divided. And so I think we need to find ways to come together and and see ourselves as a united force, a united, and we are the united government here. And some of this also, I think there are two parts. One, we need to unite. Ojai is an international city of peace. And one of the quotes about peace that I love the most comes from Deborah Felmuth. And she says that peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of oneness. And in the times when we have voted unanimously on something, like the ATP project, for example, and there have been other ones too, but that's the one that's coming clearest in my mind. There has been that kind of discourse that you're talking about. We have been able to have discussions, to ask reasonable questions, and we have acted as united force. So I know we can do it. And so it's possible. We've got the foundation for it. But what we need, I think, more than anything, is we need community support. So a couple of things, I think about this a lot, and I've been brainstorming, what could make this better? One is, I think, if people could see public comments not as an opportunity in our meetings, not as an opportunity to make personal attacks, but to raise questions, I think that could help the tone of the meeting. And I also think that we need to hold each other accountable on social media, so that when you see a thread that's really negative and has some misinformation, that we tell our neighbors, because the thing is, we're all neighbors, that we tell our neighbors, hey, you might want to think about that, or I think we don't have to keep feeding the negativity. So ultimately, we who serve are the ones who are the model for everyone else, and it's also a community-wide, I think, opportunity for us to find ways to work together and collaborate in new ways.
I offered a couple things speaking at the meeting on Tuesday, and then I offered a few things to Betsy later, which I'm happy to bring up right now. They're short.
Yeah.
They're getting to your point though, is what could we do differently? There's a few. One is this idea about this first Monday of the month brown bag lunch meeting.
I love that.
Which we're going to start that.
Yeah.
Hopefully in July. Well, that's July 3rd, so maybe later in July, but that's where anybody who wishes to come, comes, but it's Casitas, OUSD, the city council, the city manager, anybody who's available, the Chamber of Commerce, etc. So that was one. Another is this idea, what some boards do is this, called a time certain model. So you set aside a certain amount of time, 30 minutes, let's say, on an issue. And you could all agree to extend it, but it has to be a majority vote to extend it. So what I like about that is, let's use the last meeting's example. It took 3 hours. Part of that was public comments, no doubt, but to handle the thing about Sousa. So then I think it's 11 o'clock. You guys have been talking for 3 hours. There's a lot of heated words.
Right.
What do you mean the thing about Sousa?
That because of the district model that we're in right now, which we voted, as soon as we don't have to do this, we want to not do it, okay? But there is a pending case. Santa Monica has gone to the court to say this district model isn't working for us. They want to go back, so that's pending. We may not know that for a while, but we voted, Measure M, I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, that as soon as it's legally feasible to go back to the ranking vote citywide, that's what we want to do. So the district model means if you don't reside in your district, you would be removed from your office in some time frame, like 30 days. And so Sousa is having trouble relocating. So the issue is, should she be removed now or not?
Oh, I see. That took up a bunch of time.
It took 3 hours. And so that was difficult. And it was heated, by everybody. So that when you bring up the kind of the process question, that it's sort of, this is what I was saying to other people. If you're in a really good relationship with somebody and they slight you a little bit, but there's a lot of goodwill, you give them the benefit of the doubt. But if there's not a lot of goodwill, then you get really upset. And that's what's happening in the council, in my view. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was thinking about it in relation to your question, what do I think about it? And I think it relates to what you just said, is that the leader has an ethical obligation, I think, to put the integrity of the governance process above their own personal view.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So it's just out of bounds, in my view, for a leader to use procedural crap to avoid something coming to a vote, for example. So it's fine to say, here's what I think. It's time to say, here's the evidence. There's fine to say, look, this is really compelling, and bring people in. All that stuff is fine. But it's not fine, in my mind. It's actually unethical to use the role of leadership as an excuse to avoid coming to a vote because you think it's not going to go the way that you want it to go. And so you'd just rather go sideways and just use the procedure as a way of avoiding coming to a conclusion. That's just not okay. I think that's what's happening at times. Is that right? Am I right? I see that. I say that from having watched a few meetings and been to a few meetings, but I haven't been to them all.
Yes, you know, I had not thought about it that way, and I know that is not anything that's in my. If I could just pause for a second, let me think about this because I'm trying to.
So an example would be the hotel situation.
With the valet parking?
Yeah.
Okay.
So some people, we've had this hotel. This is not a new hotel.
Correct.
It's not being proposed to add a whole bunch of new rooms. It's a hotel that's been in Ojai for, I don't know, more than 50 years. With that number of rooms. And it went downhill over time to the point that it couldn't be used. And someone came along and said, hey, I'll make it a first-rate hotel for Ojai. Isn't that unambiguously a good thing for the community? To have not have a hotel in the middle of town that's falling apart,
Correct.
Looking terrible,
Yes.
but have one that is beautiful architecturally and fits into the rest of the place, and that gives one a upbeat impression when driving in, and you look and you say, hey, look at that.
Yes.
I mean,
hotel.
just to correct you, I think the Thomas Fire stopped it from operating. It was still operating when the Thomas Fire came. Now, in decline.
Okay.
But, I mean, it
It didn't fall apart.
did not fall
It didn't
apart.
fall apart.
Right. It wasn't like the theater.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that project is being delayed over an issue of preference.
Well, it had been delayed, but it's going.
Yes, it's going now.
happening.
Yeah,
It's
my
going.
understanding it is, and I've actually toured it, and it looks, it's going to be incredible
No,
when
it's-
it's
So
finished.
isn't the duration being extended as a result of all this bickering?
I think also the start date moved back because of that. So there was this happened though in the last
Yes,
council
the last
too,
council.
that it got voted to be approved because of the delays. But so it wasn't this council that delayed it, the past one, because of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
If I was the person who invested in that
Oh,
hotel
yeah.
under these circumstances,
They were
I'd be
furious.
scratching
Yes.
my head about,
Yeah.
did I pick a
Right.
weird city?
Yeah, but I think also, I mean, there are 2 points. One is the process that you're talking about, but the other is, I think the way that permitting information is communicated, and our staff is incredible. So I'm not trying to. This is before my time on the council, so I don't know exactly what happened. But I think you know, I think what you're speaking to is let's go back to being reasonable with one another and recognizing that we're all in the same community and that we ultimately want the same things. But
Well, there's something really pointed in what you said, which I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying. So everything happened the way it happened, and then we have new investors now in that particular project, and they even, if I understood it correctly, and I did attend some of those meetings, that they're going to even have more water conservation within the project that's
Correct.
being proposed. Okay,
yes,
great.
yes.
So then to me, what seems like the procedural difficulty, and this could happen on both sides, I'm just going to use this one example. Once it all gets approved, there's really nothing you could say in negative about it. Then the valet parking issue gets brought up almost as an afterthought, grasping for another. This is how it appeared. I'm not saying this is what happened. This is my perception. it looks like here's our last chance to try to get this stopped.
That's
what you mean?
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, this is after it's all been approved.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Now that might be wrong.
That could be
That's
wrong.
an outsider opinion.
That could be
not
wrong.
Informed.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what it looks like.
That's what it looks like.
And if that's right, that's just not okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't. It's unethical. It's unfair to the person who invested their money. They assumed reasonableness when they said, "I'll invest in putting this thing together." They didn't assume delays over bickering. So we're not dealing with them properly. They have reason to say that you people are a little wacko.
I've heard people say, the city managers even say, we make it deliberately difficult to start a big project in Ojai. We want it to fit into the community. We want to be conserving resources. So I get those things. I do understand that. So you don't want anybody to be able to build anything which isn't what you're saying. But it does seem more difficult than it should be.
So another example is this building. My wife and I built this building, I don't know.
95, I think.
Yeah, a long time ago, for our business. And we sold the business, kept the building, and we had this was 3 or 4 years ago, and we thought, well, let's just sell that building. So we put it on the market, someone came along, made an offer, it was in escrow. They went to visit City Hall to establish a relationship because there were things that they wanted to do. They left City Hall shaking their head and saying, we want out of the escrow. We don't want to deal with those people. It'll just take too long and be too nutty to ever get anything done. And the project was dropped out of escrow. In the end, we were happy we kept the building. It worked out fine.
Right.
But that was an example of just a kind of administratively bureaucratic, unwelcoming. Here are the hurdles you have to jump over. We're not going to help you. We're not even going to tell you what the next hurdle might be. We're just going to put the hurdles up in front. And that's about someone who would have invested in this building, would have hired people, good jobs, good paying Ojai jobs in this building.
Yes, so I'm hearing you speaking to something that's actually been one of my main priorities in my time on the council. I've spoken with Andy about this. Economic development is it's a passion of mine. I've helped a lot of businesses in my consulting business. I've helped businesses go from boots on the ground startup to public companies. And one of the things that I'm aware of from stories just like yours is that process, that we need to simplify the process for people who are trying to bring jobs here, for people who are trying to to start to fulfill their dreams, because that's really what business owners do. They make dreams come to life, and so I am serving on the Economic Development Collaborative for Ventura County. I'm making a lot of really great connections all throughout the county, looking at how can we diversify our economy, how can we be the kind of place where a green company, a startup, an artist who's launching their career, where these people feel like they have a welcome place. We become collaborators somehow in participating in someone's dream, and right now a big source of our income is tourism, the TOT, the hotel tax. And so I think it serves us to work really well with our partners and with the hotel owners to do what we can to make their jobs fulfilling, rewarding, easy, and because they're ultimately part of the solution to balancing tourism. And one thing I know from talking to some of the owners of the El Roblar is that they have some really great ideas for for the part of the valet parking idea was that people would come in, they would park their cars there and rent bikes and so they want to help keep traffic away from our streets. And I think finding more ways to work with our hotels is going to be something that benefits us, but we also need to find other streams of income for the community in case we have another fire, in case another pandemic happens. We need to be diversifying our income.
So what stands in the way of changing things so that it works better?
Well, it needs to be brought. I think that it needs to be. We need to really look at this and look at what kinds of processes business owners, anyone who wants to come and invest in this community is going through. Let's find out what didn't work. Let's see what we can do to create new processes, working with our great planning department, working with our city. Our city staff is in transition right now. So I think we have an opportunity to really look at some of these concerns and some of these difficulties that people have had, and say, what is our vision? What is our ideal? We've got a blank canvas in many ways, so we could really be putting some new processes into place that serve the interests of the people who live here right now, but also serve the interests of people who would be coming here in the future.
So I heard you say we need to investigate more what those entrepreneurs or people who want to start these things, what they're going through right now. So that's not perfectly clear what they're going through.
Right.
Okay.
And you have different types of businesses have different needs.
For sure.
And we have, I think working with the chamber, getting the chamber involved in these processes is really important. I've been having, regular meetings with Jamie Fleming, and we've been brainstorming some different ideas. And I'm also pretty much interviewing different economic development people throughout the county and in other communities. I know legislators in really small towns in New York, and so I'm getting all kinds of different ideas of what's working and what's not working.
Okay.
Are there any small towns in California that are working really, really well that we could go visit and talk to and understand and so on?
That's a great question. Yes, I think actually right here in this county there are communities that are working really well, that are on the forefront of big changes.
What's an example?
Yeah, an example. Well, one example, and fortunately, I love getting to serve on a number of these county boards, but I've heard so much about what Port Hueneme is doing right now in terms of community building, in terms of addressing some of the growth that they have with their port. Their port has become just a really good, solid international import-export facility. And so I heard a presentation about what's happening there, and I know a few of the council members, and I'm also involved in local county politics as well. So I know a little bit about what some of the changes that are happening there, and they're a city that's growing, and I think they are putting some things into place that are really interesting for me to look at and say, okay, this is how they're defining growth. Also, other cities up in Northern California, Sonoma, Petaluma. There are I think all over California, well, all over the world since COVID, communities are learning what didn't we know before. It sounds like many of us are working with the same kinds of challenges. A lot of small towns people from the city moving during COVID. This is something you hear all over the country. And then the local residents and the tourists, and how do we manage all of this new influx, and a lot of people having vacation homes and short-term rentals, and how that's changed the neighborhoods and how we think about property. And so there are communities that we're all over the country, I think, council members and aldermen, and we're all asking ourselves these questions of what now? And so I think the best thing that we can do is really brainstorm together and have conversations like this. Non-political conversations, where people are coming together. And I love what you said at the beginning before we started recording, which is when you have Chautauqua conversations, that you start out, is it okay if I repeat this? Okay, good. that you, in the Chautauqua panels, and I watch these, and so I know what you're talking about, where you have people who start on very polar opposites, but by the time you finish the conversation, you realize that we have more in common than we have different. And so I think that's, the brown bag lunches is a great idea. I've also heard of communities having conflict resolution committees or ethics committees, to where if there are challenges, so many of the public comments have had to do with ethics. What if we had committees so that we're keeping those out of our public meetings, and there's a place where you can go to manage your disagreements with one another, or to ask questions to our staff about investigating discrepancies that are taking place? I think there are those kinds of things that we could put into place, and I've done some research on this topic, and it seems like these kind of tactics work in towns like ours, or have worked in some occasions. So I think there are lots of, again, we're at a blank canvas place. I think there are lots of opportunities for us.
No, I agree. If the trust is there and the transparency is clearer for everybody, then I would say disagreement about the direction won't matter nearly as much. But the disagreement gets exaggerated by the lack of trust because of some instances that we all know about. But so that's what has to still, it seems to me, be resolved. Some of those things.
Agreed.
Can I ask you though?
Sure.
I did want to ask you this. So far on the council, even though so much is sort of overshadowed by the difficulties we're talking about, I would love you to say some of the things that the council has done that people might know about, might not know about this year.
It's such a, yes. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak on this, because I'm so excited about some of what we've been able to do, despite all of the challenges that we've had. The one that I'm probably most excited about is the rent stabilization ordinance that we had. And I want to clarify it. I know, again, I think that things get really politicized, but one of the challenges that we've heard over and over again, and I knocked on just about every door of District 2, and asking people, what is your vision for Ojai? What are some of your concerns? And one of the biggest things I heard was the price of the price of housing, and renters being concerned that their landlords at any moment could sell their homes. They have children here. That there wasn't a lot of protection for them. So the rent stabilization ordinance that we enacted gives tenants protection. So the biggest piece of that policy was about making it so that if a landlord sells their building, or if they, if they have to evict a tenant for not for an at-fault cause, we're not talking about tenants who behave badly, that the tenant has a certain period of time and that they get a relocation benefit. It's
paid for by the property owner.
Yeah, and the property owner can build this into the monthly fee. The property owner can handle this in a number of different ways.
Which are financially beneficial, or which soften the blow, or
which soften the blow. Well, for two things. One is So for landlords, it's financially beneficial for them to have renters. The renters pay for their mortgages. Maybe, yeah, yes.
One puts one's
Exactly.
money at risk.
It's true. It is true, absolutely. But they also ultimately have equity in that property. And the renter doesn't have that. So if they have to move for some reason, then the market here is really tough. There aren't a lot of places for rent, and there aren't a lot of affordable places for rent. And so it's likely that they're going to have to pay a higher rent to stay in this community, or that they'll have to relocate and move outside of town. And so this gives them, our tenant protections give them assistance. First of all, it gives them a longer time to know I've got to move, and it gives them a relocation packet, a relocation benefit that isn't a whole lot. I mean, when you factor in the first month's deposit that you have to put down, the first month's rent, the deposit, and the price of moving, the amount pretty much covers those kinds, doesn't even fully cover those kinds of things.
Now, it didn't cover, tell me, correct me, it covered some types of renters but not others, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I guess that was one of the reasons why it wasn't unanimous, is that correct?
It wasn't unanimous for a couple of reasons. First of all, because, and I didn't vote no on it, so you'd have to talk to the others about that.
Yeah.
But there were some questions about the length of the lease terms. That if someone's renting a property for 30 days or 60 days, do you still have to pay that relocation benefit? And our policy has exemptions, and we actually went in depth looking at all the different ways that we could protect individuals who might be renting out an ADU on their property, or people who have a property that their kids come and stay at. So we did our best to protect the ordinance mostly protects renters who are renting from a corporation or from from the kinds of practices that we see in that we've seen here actually.
So not like a single family home that they are now selling the home, not those people.
Yes, and there are two things. One is that we have the state rent stabilization, which does not allow it only applies to buildings that are built after or before 1995. It limits the amount that rents can go up, and the financial piece of that, the amount that we can go up, does not cover single-family homes. That our rent stabilization ordinance does not cover those, but the tenant protections do cover more than what the slight increase or the limited increase in rent does.
No, that's useful.
So the worry of the landlord is, and the complaint of the landlord is that this is a retrospective change after they have invested their money, which is significant in the financial equation. So I buy this house and I plan to rent it, and I think, is it worth this investment? How much will I get back? How does that compare with other places I can put my money? And I see a through line that says, yeah, it's worth this much because I'll make this much, and that's the financial equation. And now along comes the government, and they say, well, that's not exactly the equation. We're going to change the equation. And there's, sorry, if you would have known that, you might not have made the investment. but too bad. Change it. So now, you think that's a legitimate point of view?
In some ways, there is a statewide rent stabilization ordinance, and our and right now that means that anyone who is renting a property, that rent increase is capped at 5%. That's the state. So anyone buying a piece of property knows the state law. Ours goes just a little step further, not a whole lot further, beyond that state law, because we think it's really important that when people are getting priced out of the community and people are getting evicted and having nowhere to go, and their kids are going to school here, their jobs are here, their lives are here, their parents are here, we wanted to go just a little bit further than the state goes, so that we can incentivize landlords to keep their renters. And most of our landlords in this community are good landlords, individuals who have properties, who really want to see families moving here and staying here. And so for those people, this won't have an impact because they're already doing the right things. But for anyone who's coming in and saying, I want to invest in this community, maybe it's a larger corporation, this gives them extra layers that they would have to go through in order to because once someone's evicted, then they can raise the rates as much as they want to. And so then you have an apartment or an ADU that was renting for $1,500 to $2,000 a month, and market rate is much higher than that. Market rate's $3,000 to $7,000.
But their costs have gone up during that time. It's not like they're gouging necessarily. They might be. But it's a market, meaning that there are market forces in play, and everyone understands them. There's an irony in this all, in my mind, which is that to the extent that the city is successful in being a desirable place to live, it's a place you'd like to raise your kids and be with your family and live in the community, the prices go up. So you have a kind of a built-in difficulty.
I think the one ironic thing in what you're saying is that what is desirable about getting people to want to be here is becoming altered by possibly too many people or too many changes, where now it's not desirable in the way that it was. So that's what seems to me, that's the balancing part. But there's not an easy answer. It seems to me it's going to be a multi-front answer.
I think what you're speaking to, yes, absolutely, this is a place where people want to live. And, you're absolutely right in terms of, well, that's a blessing. Yes, we're all fortunate to live here. We really are. And our desirability brings tourists in, and it brings people who want to live here, and it makes it a good investment for those of us who own property. So if I could just add one thing about housing, and I think this speaks to your point. We've really seen a shift in the way that people think about housing since 2008. When you had all of those foreclosures and people were losing their homes, and we started to see at that point businesses, corporations coming in and buying homes and renovating them. House flipping became a big thing. And then after that, you had Airbnb, and I think it started in probably like 2014 or around that time. And so then you had investors coming into communities like Ojai or like Joshua Tree or other places that were desirable, and buying second homes that they could use as vacation homes, but they could rent out. Well, I'm not making any kind of judgments one way or the other about those things, but what I know is, and Steve Bennett talks about this too, is that those kinds of changes are, facilitated the rise in house prices and land ownership, and it really led to more of an economic divide, so that a lot of everyday people couldn't afford to buy property, to buy a home. So this is a bigger concern, and I think that we need really creative solutions to finding ways to house the people who live here and who want to stay here.
Thank you for that. But then I know focusing on the environment is something that the council cares a lot about. And we include water in that, so
Yes,
actually we
yes,
do too.
yes.
But say more about your feelings about that.
Yeah, you know, the environment and mitigating the effects of climate change is it's one of my biggest priorities. I think we're in a really great time right now. We've had all this rain flow. Since we got elected, it's kind of funny. Water was one of our great big talking points in our election. And since we've been elected, I think now the Ojai Basin's at 63%. It's, you know, it's really good. But what we do know is that that the climate is changing. Our county is the temperatures are rising at a rate that's faster than most other places in the country. And when you have, one of the effects of climate change in this region is going to be droughts, followed by fires, followed by heavy rains. And so there's a real rain-fire relationship that we need to be thinking about. And so I think we're in a time right now, kind of like where Ojai was in 2015. We know that as the brush from all this amazing super bloom that we had, that as that starts to dry out, that we're going to be at a greater risk for fires. So now is the time to be thinking about how do we prepare for those kinds of things. In addition to that, I think looking at climate and looking at the environment doesn't have to be regulating. It doesn't have to be all about taking away our rights to use greenhouse gases. I think it can be things like planting trees and creating more shade. I think it can be things like, really connecting people with the resources and incentives that are already available at the state and federal level and county level to have solar panels built, to change over your water heaters. We are in a process right now in our home of making our entire property drought resistant, and we using rain barrels and trying all kinds of techniques that I can then share with anyone who's interested. And we're also looking at electrifying our house and doing away with gas, getting solar panels, getting water heat pumps, electric heat pumps, and it's really doable. And it doesn't take a lot. But I think if people had access to those resources, and if we could connect them with resources, then when you know better, you do better, and when you have information, then it's easier to put the steps into place to making those kinds of changes.
That information would be extremely valuable. It's hard to get.
It's on my website. I have simplified it for everyone. I've blocked it out. Solar panels, water heaters. Yeah.
My question though, related on this subject, is that sometimes development projects of different variety, the argument is climate change to not have that project go forward. That sometimes gets used. So then that's where, from my view, I think, so I don't want to be facetious, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head, but we're not going to build this building so that the climate won't change. That's what we're saying. And even if I were to take the principle, think globally and act locally, which I completely agree with, however, there's unintended consequences of acting if we say, climate is number one, and we've got to act with that number one priority. Then you would say, well, why do we let cars drive in Ojai? Yeah. The reason is it would be worse not to. But that's not like connecting. You have to connect the dots in a more, as you say, nuanced way. So when people bring up climate as thwarting development, do you feel like the approach needs to be nuanced?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think the whole approach to development needs to be nuanced. Like, there are so many different ways that a community can develop. We can develop intellectually. We can develop through building projects. I don't think climate ever has to be an excuse. I think it's a reality. It's something that we are facing. But many builders now and are we also, one of the things that we've done is a greenhouse gas emissions reduction ordinance here, and so we've actually, we have anyone who wants to build here is going to build greener, more sustainable projects. So I think that there are incredibly innovative ways to build buildings now, to use recycle water, have those kinds of things, and we're seeing that with we just approved to move forward with a Habitat for Humanity project, which will be 8 units that build a path to home ownership for 8 families. So that's going to be going up over on Montgomery, and the designs that we approved moving forward on are incredible for sustainability. Solar panels, irrigation, and so I have a lot of hope for where building is going and for what architects are doing. Like Mark Whitman here is really doing cutting edge things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we want to give you the last word. Is there anything else you would like to say before we conclude?
I think one thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something that you brought up about James, about our city manager leaving. We are going to miss him so much. He is incredible, and it is such a loss for us and such a gain for Port Hueneme. And so I really, as I said, Port Hueneme is doing some incredible things right now. From what I've learned, I know I'm not inside and I don't know all the ins and outs, but I think when I hear him talk about it, he talks about what a great opportunity it is, and he loves surfing and he's right there, and I do think that. I don't know for certain what, I think the opportunity drew him more than he felt like he had to get out of Ojai, I would hope. But I think speaking to what we first started talking about, which is what do we do about this division and people not trusting each other and some of the dysfunction that we're seeing. And so I think James's departure is a real opportunity for us to, as a community, do that soul searching and come up with a new vision for what government looks like, for how we relate with one another, and for how we can be more of a unified force. And that's really, I know I'm an idealist, I know I'm an optimist, I know we have challenges to solve, but I think more than challenges, we have incredible opportunities. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what comes on the other side of this.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Nice to talk
Thank you.
with
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. I appreciate it.